Paul and Silas dealing with unbelievers. We've kind of talked about this a little bit, but they find themselves in jail because they've been proclaiming the gospel and people didn't want to hear it, so they've locked them up. While they're there, they're singing and praying, which I don't know if that would be what I'd be doing in jail back in the day.
It's what Eric did.
It's what Eric did, yeah, of course. That's another this roundtable discussion. Yeah, exactly.
This is a tell-all thing, right?
Yeah.
Freedom.
Moving forward, so there's this earthquake, and the
Just kidding, Eric wasn't in jail as far as
no, okay.
for the record.
The jailer who's guarding the jail assumes that the prisoners, Paul and Silas, have escaped, and so he's feeling very convicted and wants to take his life. He feels like this is the end because that was going to be his result if he gets found out. But it turns out they hadn't escaped, and they actually...
this is awkward.
That's okay.
Is that the Holy Spirit?
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Hello, Lord.
So they actually convert him. They say, don't do it. And they care for him. And it turns out this jailer has a conversion, and he starts to care for them. And ultimately, he's the one that helps them be released. They also find themselves going to different towns and villages after being released. And there's people that will both laugh at them and mock them, and then also people say, we want to hear more. And so what's your experience been as you've been here at Hope, or as you've heard stories about working with people, and how do you continue to have grace for the unbeliever, the person who continues to mock and to laugh? What's our approach? What do we learn from Acts about our response to that?
First, you have to recognize that a lot of times the laughter is a ruse. It's a mask that covers up some hurt. Mm-hmm. And when you recognize that, when you recognize the people that are lashing out the most, why are you so angry that somebody believes in God? What's really behind that? And that can give you some sort of empathy to see that out of hurt, that person is lashing out. And then connecting with them and trying to understand where they're coming from is the next key. And once you can understand where they're coming from, you can really have a conversation.
Yeah.
We can have lots of conversations where we debate and we prove ourselves right and they prove themselves right, and it doesn't go anywhere. What we have to say is, I'm more interested in a relationship with you than I am in being right. And if we said that in our relationships with each other, in our families, or in talking to atheists on Facebook, or in the political arena, say, I'm more interested in you, in a relationship with you, than I am in being right, I think it would go a long way in our society.
When they're in jail. Obviously, I'm guessing anyway, they didn't want to be there, but it wasn't a choice of theirs. They found themselves locked up, persecuted, squeezed in some ways because of what they were proclaiming. And very likely, probably, maybe even thought that they were going to get killed at the end of that sentence. And yet, their faith is being, I'm still thinking about the first question, why is Acts relevant, like this story of Paul in jail? It's because he was getting squeezed because of his faith, persecuted, stressed out. And he was having to figure out what you're talking about, Ben. How can I continue to be filled with the Spirit and let that freedom come out of me, and trust that this jailer, the one who's directly in persecution or in charge of keeping them locked up, trust that God's will through His power of the Spirit will lead here. And when I think about that, and then we see this thing come about, and this man is transformed, and freedom abounds everywhere then with the release. And I think that this is a story in Acts late in the book now that still survives as a place of asking ourselves when we leave church and we're called to be good and bring our assets together as a church and give to the poor and the needy and propel the mission of God. And whenever we get squeezed at our own home, street, neighbor, workplace, we may not be actually behind physical bars, but we experience something like that has a chance to stop our faith. It's a story like this that we can find an example of. Paul hung in there, and he was singing. Maybe he didn't want to, but it was a discipline that he developed to keep his heart and his mind focused on God. Mm-hmm. So it's a great story of hanging in there with God and not underestimating His dream and the power of the Spirit.
I think, Justin, I've gotten to a place where not much surprises me. I've seen a lot of things and heard of a lot of things and a lot of beliefs, but so when I'm having a conversation with someone who thinks I'm ridiculous for believing what I believe, it doesn't bother me a whole lot, but I also try to humbly say, I used to be there. I mean, I've had to grow. I used to think certain things that I maybe believe right now. I used to think that was ridiculous for anyone to believe it, and then God changed me. So I think that's, so it's not necessarily my job to change or to convince. I think it's at the end of Acts 17 where Paul's at Mars Hill, and some believed, some wanted to hear more, some thought he was a thief. Yeah, and so to me it's like he let go of the outcome.
Yeah.
His job was just to share, proclaim, whatever, and then God's going to take care of whatever. And to have that kind of an attitude is a very freeing kind of place to be.
When you say that, Scott, I'm thinking of back to chapter 1, that the call was that you will be my witnesses to the world, and that's what God, that's really the essence of what Paul did there.
John?
And I just think because Acts is so action-packed, what we don't get is the stories in between the stories. And you get little glimpses of it. The power of relationship and how they would, it wasn't like this, I'm going to jut in and jut out of your life. We miss the stories. We get little hints out of them staying with people for days or weeks, whatever. It wasn't just this in and out.
It's in like one sentence, like
Priscilla
and Aquila.
They hung out there for a long time.
And Claudius had been, was there, and all the Jews were made to leave Rome because of the persecution of the Jews at that time. So it's saying this something about the relationship and also about the circumstances. Just this little throwaway verse if you miss it, but it's it's saying they're refugees, and they're in Corinth because the city they lived in was not welcoming to them.
I love the verse
That'll preach.
in First Thessalonians, I think chapter 5 maybe, Paul says, we were delighted to not only share the gospel with you, but our lives as well.
Yeah.
That's a summary verse of, I feel like, when we're working with those that don't believe, do we care about them as people, as brothers and sisters, not just as projects? And a quick way to know that is, am I going to love and care for this person whether they either convert to my way of thinking or not, or do I see them as a person or as a project? And I think from that verse and from the way that they did ministry, it's life on life and life in community, not a debate here and there without relationship.
Absolutely.